Well, beautiful people, it is episode 32, and we have a lot to celebrate. For example, it's a beautiful Indian summer day. It's like 19 or 20 degrees in the middle of November. There's not going to be many more of these, people, so get out there and enjoy it. It is coming up to Remembrance Day. That was Armistice Day until 1931, but it's been Remembrance Day in Canada ever since. The 11th day, the 11th month, the 11th hour, we take a minute. So don't forget to take a minute, people. The dismantling of democracy in the U.S. seems to have been temporarily halted. So another reason for celebration. Seems like my neighbors have set up a little rehearsal space in their garage, and they're trying to learn All Day and All of the Night by the Kinks. Bravo for them. So lots of good stuff happening. It is National Harvey Wallbanger Day. For those of you who are mere teenagers, it's not something rude. It's actually 3 parts vodka, 1 part Galliano, 6 parts orange juice. You take some ice, you pour in the vodka on top of the ice, you pour in the orange juice, then you put the Galliano on top. It is a very refreshing summer drink from the 1970s. I remember in the 70s, I had a buddy, Rick. He had a Volkswagen Bug, and me and him would go bombing around, and he would always have the makings for a Harvey Wallbanger. He could make one at a drop of a hat whenever a party materialized. So, check it out. I've heard they might be coming back, okay? So, this week, episode 32, we're going to talk about that amazing record that changed the folk world, the Anthology of American Folk Music. Sounds drab, sounds droll, doesn't it? It's not. It's actually a pretty fucking cool story. So, here we go. Hold on to your fedoras. Every once in a while, an album comes out that just defines its time. Even if it's not incredibly commercially successful, there are some albums that, in retrospect, we realize, oh, something just changed there. Like, think of the first Ramones album, or the first Velvet Underground album. So in the folk world, this happened in 1952 with the release of this box set, 3 albums, of the Anthology of American Folk Music. And when this album came out, it like turbocharged the entire folk music scene in America especially, but also in Britain. So everybody who got this album was just like mesmerized by it. They could not believe all this great, old, creaky American music that was on this, and it made them want to go out and buy banjos and fiddles and learn how to do that. And it was just like a revolutionary thing. And people like Dave Van Ronk famously said, everybody in the folk scene knew every single word of every single song on all 3 albums, even the ones they hated. Bob Dylan was famously very much influenced by this. Many, many people, basically said this was the defining moment of the folk revolution in the States. You know, there'd been people collecting folk for years, these Lomaxes and so on, and, going out and doing field recordings. This wasn't that. This was actually a collection of music that had been commercially released between about 1927 and 1932. And it was a very specific batch of songs. So we can't really talk about this until we introduce Mr. Harry Smith. Here he is. So pinning down Harry is no easy task. He was an artist, he was a filmmaker, a anthropologist, he was a, wait for it, ethnomusicologist of sorts, occultist, mostly self-taught. He was respected in many different artistic communities, and he was an underground superstar, from a pretty early age. But part of what the appeal is, it's hard to pin him down because he just keeps bouncing around from one thing to another. But everything he did full tilt, like absolutely gonzo. if you will. Okay, he was fascinated by Indian culture. He grew up on the west coast in Portland, Oregon. He had a bit of an odd childhood. I think his folks lived in different houses, and they only like came together for dinner, and they were occultists and theosophists and what have you. He was very interested in the West Coast Indian culture from a very early age. There's a picture of him, I think like he's 10 or 12 or something, with a tape recorder and a bunch of West Coast Indians standing around, and he's recording one of their dances or their songs or something. So he, at a very early age, he's kind of into music, he's into culture, he's into anthropology, he's into frickin' everything, in fact. Like I said, mostly self-taught. He ended up going to Berkeley for a while, and he spent a lot of time smoking marijuana there, apparently, and taking a couple anthropology courses. And I think while he was there, he became very interested in the bebop music scene there. So he started painting these pictures of music. Okay, so he had a picture of a Dizzy Gillespie song, and he could describe why all this color and all these lines exactly represented that song. And then he took on a Charlie Parker song, and apparently that was so complicated it took him years to finish this picture. But he said, you could look at this picture and I can tell you every single note that Charlie Parker's playing here, and it all has meaning in my painting. But this was so exhausting for him that he had to move on to something else. So he got into filmmaking, and he became quite prominent in avant-garde filmmaking. Again, Harry doesn't know where to stop. So he is basically made a film where he painted by hand every single frame. Okay? I don't know if I'll get in trouble for showing this. I'll show you like a couple seconds, okay? So here's Harry's painting every single frame of this film, and it takes him like 8 years to do it. And people come over to his house, and he's got acid and bleach, and he's got something in his mouth, he's blowing paint onto the film, and he says, hey, wait a minute, I'm busy here. And these are still well-known avant-garde films, and you can go see them on the Tube of You. So it's interesting stuff. At the same time, now this kind of comes back to our main story here. Harry, at a pretty early age, started collecting records. Okay, and it was mostly in those days there were 78s, and what he was finding is that as we got closer to World War II, people were getting rid of their 78s because it became war material. And you could actually get some money if you had a whole bunch of old 78s and they'd just mulch them and turn it into, I don't know what they've turned into, bombs or something. So America was gradually eating alive its own cultural heritage. And Harry would be going around to all these places, old Salvation Armies and thrift shops and junk shops and rummage sales, and he'd be looking through all these old 78s, and anything he found that he thought was odd or interesting, he'd take. So he ended up with this collection that filled his entire frickin' apartment, because Harry doesn't know when to stop. So he has like thousands of 78s, okay? And here's where it gets kind of interesting, is he gets a grant. He gets a Guggenheim grant that gives him a little dough so he can leave Los Angeles, or, leave Berkeley, and he goes to New York City. And he's going to New York City for two reasons. One, he wants to hear Thelonious Monk play, and I'm totally on board with that. I would have loved to hear Thelonious Monk play. Monk is the king. Two, he wants to study Kabbalah, and New York City's the place to do it. So he takes his grant money, goes to New York, and he's even on the West Coast and now on the East Coast, he's all involved in the beat scene now. He knows Ginsberg and Burroughs and Corso and all these guys, and he's hanging with them. He's smoking marijuana like a fiend. He'll do any kind of drugs you give him for free. Harry's never got any dough. Harry is always living hand to mouth, okay? So somehow or other, it turns out he meets this guy, Mo Ash, who is one of the owners of Folkways Records. And Harry says, listen, I've got billions of these old records. I want to sell them to you because I need a little dough. And Mo and Harry start talking, and Mo realizes that Harry is a mad scientist genius. And this is around the 51 or something. This is when LP records, 33 and a third LP records, start coming out. And they realize, you know what we could do? Do you know what we could frickin' do? We could put out an anthology of all those old creaky records. So Harry is all in on this, because Harry doesn't know when to stop. He is all frickin' in on this. And he starts organizing these records, which is really what Harry does. Harry is an artist, but he's a collector, and he's an organizer. So he gathers all his thousands and thousands of creaky old 78s, and he picks out about 80 of them, 80 or 90 of them, and he groups them together. And he groups them into ballads, social music, and songs. And then he organizes them in order so that each song kind of leads into the next one in a certain way, even though these are very different songs. And he picks certain genres that he feels are representative of American culture. So he's got some blues, he's got some hillbilly, he's got some Cajun, he's got some gospel music. That's pretty much what he's focusing in on. So they start working on this thing, and they eventually pull it together. And not only does Harry organize all these songs, and don't forget, these are songs that were commercially released, and between, say, 27 and 32. And the reason for that is, in 27 was when we could really start getting quality recordings, and 32, the Depression hit, and all those record companies went out of business. Most of them did. So there was the number of records that were produced after 32 just dropped off like, buffaloes off a cliff, to coin a phrase, right? So Harry is not only selecting the songs, he's not only organizing them into the big groups and sequencing them, he's also designing the cover, and he makes this fantastical little booklet. It's not even a little. He makes this fantastical big booklet that goes in the box set. And this whole concept is like revolutionary. Nobody's ever done this kind of anthology before. So there's a couple of things here. So, for example, they don't really have the rights to these songs, These songs were commercially released. Some of them were like, people who just did one record and then sunk, off the out of the public view. Some of them were by, pretty notable people. The Carter family, Blind Lemon Jefferson. These guys sold a lot of records, and somebody still owns the rights to these. But so basically, the anthology was almost like a bootleg that was put out professionally on Folkways Records. So what we should do is take a look at the cover, okay? We're going to take a second and look at the cover. Okay, so the first thing you got to look at here is all three albums have the same cover, but just with different colors. And there's a plan here. So the ballads are songs that tell a story in a linear way, and they're green for water. The social music, which are, dances and Cajun music and gospel music, they're red for fire. And the songs, which are like the folk lyric tradition, they're blue for air. But all three of them have this thing this old etching on the cover. So this is an etching by this guy named Theodore de Bry, and he lived in the 1500s. And what you're looking at there is what Harry Smith called the celestial monochord. Look at it. It's just got one string, okay? It's just got one string. And what's that? It's the hand of God coming down to tune the celestial monochord. And if you look around, there's all this little writing around it, and it's all like occult, mystical writing. So you know right away, this is not your typical Joan Baez record, okay? Yeah, and it wasn't just your generic white toast folk album either, was it? Like, how did all this mystical mumbo jumbo end up being the definitive folk album of all time? Well, this is the mystery and the magic of Harry Smith's collecting and sequencing, is that he didn't pick these songs necessarily because like they were top 10 hits or anything. He picked them because they're weird, and he found that this weirdness actually defined America in a way that it kind of sunk in, and it defined a bit of the counterculture that happened in the 50s and 60s. So all this old creaky music and strange music. I mean, we've talked about Bascom Lamar Lunsford before. So he's got the song Mole in the Ground. And, you know, there's these lines in Mole in the Ground like, I don't like the railroad man. He'll kill you if he can. And he'll drink your blood like wine. And then there's another line about how he wants to be a little lizard. And this is weird music. And this is weird American music, and people loved it. It changed the way that everybody thought about music. So it presented all these songs that a lot of people had no ability or resources to go find, but Harry Smith had gone out to all those Salvation Armies and all those thrift shops, and he had gathered together all this stuff, and he put it out there for them and said, here's the old weird America. Lap it up. And people did. Bob Dylan mentioned that, he says some people think that folk music should, keep it simple. It's straightforward. It's just folk music, And he says, you listen to those old songs, there's nothing simple about them. They're weird. I've never written anything as odd as I could never possibly write anything as odd as some of those old songs that are on the anthology. So Harry, he just kept going. And he after the anthology, he kept doing stuff, and he became a famous collector. Like, he kept doing his films, kept doing his crazy art. He became a collector, and he started collecting things like paper airplanes. He had one of the largest collections of paper airplanes in the world. He had boxes of them, and he meticulously identified each one, where it was, where he found it, what year, what's it made out of, what special characteristics does this plane have. He collected string, but not just any string. This was an anthropological thing. He found that people around the world would make string art. And he found that the only place that really didn't have a lot of string art was Europe. And he found that odd. But he has one of the largest collections of string art in the world. Looks something like this. So he also collected Easter eggs. He collected old toys. And everything he collected, remember, Harry doesn't know when to stop. So he just he had boxes of it, and it's all organized properly. It's indexed. Everything is recorded. So all his paper airplanes, all his string, all his Easter eggs, all his spoons, all his toys, all his 10 billion old 78 records, everything organized meticulously. Harry, he was a bit of an odd man. So many crazy stories about Harry. One artist was walking along with his girlfriend, in downtown New York, and he didn't really know Harry all that well. And he sees Harry and says to his girlfriend, "Oh, there's Harry." And Harry walks up to him and says, "Hey, have you got a drink?" And the guy said, well, no, I don't actually. And then Harry just falls down on the street in New York and starts foaming at the mouth until some rubby comes along, takes pity on him, and pours some booze down into his throat. And he smartens up a little bit. Then the guy says, well, that's interesting. We were going to go look for a certain kind of a dance performance. And Harry says, I know where you have to go. Let's get a cab. So they ordered a cab. They went up to Harlem, which cost a fortune. They went to see some cabaret, and it was exactly what this guy and his girlfriend were looking for. They got out of the cabaret, and Harry says, okay, let's take a cab back home. The guy says, no, I don't have any money. I spent all my money on the cab up here. So they start walking, and they're walking along a street in Harlem, and Harry all of a sudden jumps into a garbage can and pulls out this stuff. And it looks like some local photographer had just thrown out all his pictures. Harry, who knows how he saw this, but he just like instinctively found the pictures, and he started organizing them on the sidewalk. And he put them in different orders until he was finally happy with the order. People were starting to gather around. And there was 20 or 30 people there. And then Harry took each picture and gave each bystander one of the photographs, and everybody was happy. And that was like some crazy-ass performance art. Harry was produced the first album by the underground New York band, the Fugs. Ed Sanders of the Fugs was at a party one time, and somebody said, oh, there's a magician over there. And he looked up, and it was Harry Smith, and they was introduced to Harry Smith, and he ended up producing their record, and he was apparently brilliant at it. One thing he did, Ed Sanders says, was that he recorded everything, even all their little babble and talk in between songs, and then he spliced it into the songs later on. So he was a master producer there. He ended up living at the Chelsea Hotel, and then he ended up crashing with Allen Ginsberg, who took pity on him because Harry never had any dough, right? Harry was always hand-to-mouth. And after a while, Allen Ginsberg's doctor said, you have to send Harry away. It's bad for your heart. Because Harry is like he's high maintenance, okay? Harry's high maintenance. So Allen Ginsberg sends Harry off to his school that he's running out in Washington, I think. Or anyway. And finally he hears that, the money he's sending Harry's just surviving on amphetamines and raw eggs. Because Harry doesn't know when to stop, okay? He's just and he just keeps doing his art, but he's crazy, he loves marijuana, he's doing peyote, he's doing everything. So finally he comes back, and they move him into the Chelsea Hotel again, and he passes away. So that's the story of Harry Smith. So when you think about these three albums, and the very last song on the last album, you'd think maybe he's trying to tell you something, and I think maybe he is. So this is a song about fishing, and I have at least, I know one friend out there who loves fishing, so this one's for you, brother. I'll see you next week. Went up to the hill about 12 o'clock, reached right back and got me a pole. Went to the hardware, got me a hook, attached that hook right onto the line. Said, you've been a fishing all of the time, I'm going fishing too. Bet your life your loving wife gonna catch more fish than you. And a fish will bite if you got good bait. Here's a little something that I like to relate. I'm a going fishing, yes, I'm going fishing, and my baby's going fishing too. Looked down the river about 1 o'clock, spied that catfish swimming around. Got so hungry, didn't know what to do. I'm gonna get me a catfish too. Yes, you've been a fishing all of the time, I'm a going fishing too. Bet your life your loving wife gonna catch more fish than you. And a fish will bite if you got good bait. Here's a little something that I like to relate. I'm a going fishing, yes, I'm going fishing, and my baby's going fishing too. Put 'em on a skillet, don't never mind your lead. Mama gonna cook 'em with shortening bread. Say fishing all of the time, I'm a-going fishing too. Bet your life, your loving wife gonna catch more fish than you. And a fish will bite if you got good bait. Well, here's a little something that I like to relate. And a fish will bite if you got good bait. I'm a-going fishing, yes, I'm going fishing in